Hello and you're welcome to Business Highlights on Trust TV. On the show, we take you through some of the biggest business developments as well as analyze major policy developments and how they affect the average Nigerian out there. I am your host, Chamun Dabeng. Let's talk numbers. Now, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank held its 2023 spring meeting. Now, during these discussions, Nigeria was brought to the fore, and they did take a look at some of the major economic challenges within our nation, like the removal of fuel subsidy, as well as expanding Nigeria's tax bracket and handling our debt profile. We'll be getting into that right after the break. You're welcome back to Business Highlights. My name is Chamun Dabeng, and today we're going to be taking a look at some of the highlights from the International Monetary Fund and World Bank 2023 spring meeting. Now, joining me in the studio to discuss some of the topics that were brought up is political and economic analyst Joseph Ako. You're welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Now, if you followed it, you see that, there were discussions, as I said earlier on, talking about Nigeria's own economic challenges. They brought up, of course, the controversial subsidy removal, as well as Nigeria's debt profile and expanding Nigeria's tax brackets. Now, these discussions have been major discussions of recent. Now, what do you think about these issues coming up during these meetings?
I think the issues are not new and the recommendations are not strange. These are reasons, or these are issues that we're already conversant with as a nation. Remember, the IMF had projected that 2/3 of the world's economy would be slipping into recession this year. And at the spring meeting, the World Bank was saying that developing countries like Nigeria would be hit hardest with these harsh 2023 economic realities. So nothing strange. They spoke about the fact that Nigeria still operates multiple exchange rates. Also spoke about the fact that Nigeria should be looking at diversifying off oil and paying special attention on agriculture and tackling issues
so these are just, they are basic discussions that we would have on a day-to-day basis. I mean, we've had them even on the show. But I would like to come to the issue of subsidy removal. Now, it's not that far off. We have May, June, and that's pretty much it. Now, looking at this, we've seen Labour kick against this, and this is not the first time we've seen Labour kick against it in the past. Now, do we really have an option but to remove subsidy? Do we have any other way to look apart from subsidy removal? I
think the problem with the Nigerian Labour Congress or trade union generally is the issue of trust. They don't have enough trust to really look at supporting or allowing the government to just take out petroleum subsidy. There's the issue of trust. There's the issue of strong arguments. The government has not given very strong argument. Oh, if you remove petroleum subsidy, this is what we'll be doing to really cushion the effects of the removal of petroleum subsidy. We've seen the government put out a plan, around the 800 million as a grant or loan from the World Bank. So we see the government targeting areas, but I mean, for example, let's say the government's plan at giving out making conditional cash transfers to the poorest of the poor. Now the question has been asked regarding the status of the register with which the government was going to use to implement that particular policy.
Who are they exactly?
And exactly, and what really will that do to the overall economy? I mean, that money will just be consumed. We have seen monies around anchor borrowers. We have seen markets, trader money and all that stuff. I mean, the government should say, okay, with trader money, this was how much economic effect we're able to generate. with anchor borers, this was how much economic effects we were able to generate. Then with this particular policy item, this is how much. But we've seen how ineffective that treasury money has been, anchor borers, and all the other social investment schemes that this government has undertaken in the past. So there is the question of, will this particular policy be effective? Will this really cushion the effects of subsidy removal?
Okay, now, like you said, will this really cushion the effects of subsidy removal? Now, you have the $800 million. Is this really enough? You're talking about the poorest of the poor. How do we even identify who they really are? Exactly. We've already heard NBS say that 133 million Nigerians are multidimensionally poor. So how do you now, sort of find your way through all of that?
So I've argued in the past that for this particular intervention, or any intervention with regards to the removal of the petroleum subsidy to be effective, the government must invest in shared social infrastructure. We're talking about primary health care. We're talking about public transportation. We're talking about basically shared social education and so on and so forth, shared social infrastructure. So until the government begins to consider that, we'll just be papering the cracks at the most.
All right, so you did talk about an issue of trust with labor itself. Yeah. Now, these are the people that are representing your everyday Nigerian, the government workers, the people selling in the markets and all of that. How do we, handle that trust deficit? Because with subsidy removal, I mean, we do have some benefits with that because the country does end up saving trillions of naira. Yeah. I mean, it was said by the NNPC that we spend about 4 billion naira a month in order to pay for fuel subsidy. Yeah. So of course we're going to have some good savings from this. So how do we bring about that, or erase that trust deficit that the people feel? I
think the government should lead by example. We're talking about reducing the cost of governance. I remember a previous appearance here, I identified 3 cancer points in the current, with the 2023 budget proposal. Mm-hmm. First was this subsidy payments. The second was the high cost of recurrent expenditure. And the third was our debt service payment. Then the other point I'd made was, if the government is really serious about subsidy removal, the government should show example and that willingness and that general appreciation of the whole economic reality by saying, oh, we're going to cut down the cost of governance. We're going to reduce this amount of money allocated for these. For example, the money spent on feeding in Aso Villa, we're going to reduce it. The amount of allowances for public office holders, we're going to reduce it. All of these would really bring Nigerians to that point where they can now accept the fact that, let's go ahead and remove petroleum subsidy. Because until the government leads by example, the average Nigerian will be wrestling with the idea of, at the end of the day, if this subsidy removal is followed through, it's just the average man on the street that will suffer. This political, or the people belonging to the political class will just be shielded from that. That's
with subsidy removal?
Yeah.
All right, so my next question now. So we have a myriad of economic challenges. Now the argument really is that fuel subsidy removal is going to bring in savings, and this is going to go towards, social, ensuring social welfare as much as, and also infrastructural development. But is this really the savior that we are actually looking for? How much of an impact is subsidy removal going to have on Nigeria's economic situation?
I think with subsidy removal, we are going to be walking into an inoperative budget. Our debts would rise to, the DMO had said that our debts, if we continue with this year's subsidy payment, 77 trillion naira. Mm-hmm. So that will render our budgets inoperative, and that will just automatically plunge Nigeria into recession. So First of all, subsidy removal will take care of big expenditure that otherwise would have gone into critical areas of the economy. And number two, subsidy removal will signal, I mean, if you add that with the recently passed Petroleum Industry Act, with that, in combination with the Petroleum Industry Act, will signal to the outside world and will bring in foreign direct investments, particularly in the petroleum sector, and to other sectors of the economy that will begin to come on stream as a result of the subsidy removal. So, I mean, the benefits are no doubt apparent, but the problem has always been trust.
Okay, so
2012 up until now.
All right, so apart from trust, what other challenges are we looking at that will most likely come with subsidy removal? There's so many discussions now about deregulating the oil market. Of course, there's the monopolization of the market and so many other things, where at the end of the day is the common man, the Nigerian, the average Nigerian out there that ends up taking the brunt of all of this. Where do we ensure the protection for Nigerians out there?
I think I'm not going to say here that subsidy removal will not is all good news. Will not
come with its challenges,
of course. But when we do a critical analysis of our current reality vis-a-vis subsidy removal, the common sense alternative is for us to go with subsidy removal. I know the issues of trust, the issues of the fact that there are underlying issues in the petroleum sector. For example, another thing I should add, together with reducing the cost of governance, that would address the issue of trust. There are reports. I mean, we have seen auditing around the petroleum sector. There was a house inquiry into subsidy payments in the past. Of course, there are people that have benefited at the expense of the Nigerian state because of petroleum subsidy. All of these people should be brought to book. I think if we do that
would
also,
definitely help with the trust deficit.
Exactly. But the point I'm making also is that without subsidy removal, the Petroleum Industry Act is also inoperative because that is a major block. As a matter of fact, that's the cornerstone of the Petroleum Industry Act. And until that is taken care of, I mean, there's no discussion around possible foreign direct investments in the petroleum sector. The issues of modular refineries coming on stream. I mean, we have an example in Nigeria. We had fertilizer subsidy in the past, some years ago. The government of the day, Jonathan's administration, removed a fertilizer subsidy. And now in Nigeria, we have over 50 fertilizer blending plants. Yes. I mean, there's no issue of politicians promising to make fertilizers available for farmers as a way of buying votes. So we have that as an example. So that would automatically follow with subsidy removal in the petroleum sector. It will take care of these big hindrances that, I mean, all
right, I'll ask you to hold your horses there. We'll take a short break, and when we get back, we're going to be moving on to Nigeria's debt profile, so don't go anywhere.
Now, as part of efforts to support Africa's goal of strengthening...
Now, looking at the activity chart, as you can see right here, a total volume of 130...
Created a Boko Haram crisis that at that time was restricted to Yobe.
How secured are they? You can see security men with blood.
This is the road leading up to the...
Already, if you look at England squad, you are looking at EPL, you are looking at their names. You are not looking at...
You're welcome back to Business Highlights on Trust TV. My name is Chamunda Beng and I'm still here with political and economic analyst Joseph Ago. And we're currently taking a look at some of the highlights from the International Monetary Fund and World Bank 2023 spring meeting. Now, they talked about several different economic challenges that the world is facing. They talked about the Ukraine war. They talked about global inflationary pressures. So many different discussions, but we're taking our discussion straight down to where it affects us and what we can do to handle our own situation. Now, part of the discussion, of course, was Nigeria's debt profile. Now, we're looking at 77 trillion naira, which the next administration is going to be inheriting May 29th, of course. Yeah. Now, we have 46 trillion naira, another 23 trillion naira that we owe to the Central Bank of Nigeria. Now, taking a look at all of this, now, Nigeria has a self-imposed threshold of 40%. Well, basically at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let me get your comments on this situation.
I think, of course, we're gradually marching to this point, and it's not shocking at all. The problem has been, number one, the high cost of governance, particularly in regards to recurrent expenditure. We're also the subsidy payments as a large part of that, this whole problem. Then we also have the issue of debt servicing. So, and other additional issues. We have the problem of misappropriation of funds. We have the problem of leaks and wastages. So it's a day we saw coming. I mean, many of us saw coming, and I think the incoming administration would need to tackle this maybe next or the first 6 months, because I mean, we can't go on borrowing. I mean, the other day it was reported that the Chinese bank, that's the communists, that the Bank of China refused giving our latest loan application. So, I mean, if we don't address that, we're going to have to deal with a lot of economic issues, both internally and externally. So, there's no the finance minister had suggested that we hike taxes as a way of addressing this problem. But again, the economy is wobbly. The economy is shaky. And
we'll get into the discussion about opening Nigeria's tax bracket. Of course, it's still a very major discussion. A lot of Nigerians are pretty much against it, because when you take a look at inflationary pressures, you take a look at the cost of living today, adding that burden to the average Nigerian is going to be a lot. But still focusing on Nigeria's debt profile. Now, what are some of the challenges the next administration is going to be facing as far as debt servicing is concerned?
I think the recommendation from the spring meeting was that the next administration should look at restructuring our debt. And we need to, of course, there's been the clamor, not just Nigeria, but together with other African countries, about another round of debt forgiveness. South African government, for example, the president is, I mean, front of talking about that. So, would need to explore that option if possible. I know a number of these debtors are not particularly willing to go that route, because again the question is, well, we forgive you guys the other time. What did you guys do? You guys just went and got some more debt. So we need to really look at restructuring our debt. We also need to look at revenue and plugging those leakages revenue. I mean, oil theft is a big issue in Nigeria. We're also looking at general corruption. You know, so we need to really focus on blocking those leakages, addressing the issue of corruption, and like was advised by the World Bank, try and restructure our debt.
All right. So Nigeria currently has a dollar-denominated debt, which is about 42% of its outstanding loans. Now, do we have a dollarization issue, and how does this really affect our ability to service our debt?
I mean, servicing our debt is already an issue. So it's
It's already a problem.
It's already a problem. So we're already in that mess already. So dollarization. I think the issue of dollarization would arise if currency, that's the naira, begins to balloon. Well, we've not seen that yet. Some days ago, I was looking at rates. I saw some marginal gains with regards to our currency. But on the whole, the problem is really with that overall economic blueprint that the next administration will be bringing. And if a lot of that economic blueprint is just talking about taxation, talking about some very bogus and like sugar tax the other day and all that stuff, and not really addressing the fundamentals of our economy, will just be kicking the can down the road, or postponing doomsday.
But you know, we do still have, should I say, a very epileptic, pardon me, FX situation. You know, today it's at 900, tomorrow it's 400, 700. It's all over the place. And of course, if we're paying back in dollars, doesn't this just make things more harder for the country?
You know, the points, and again, it has been made so many times, and it was again made at the spring meeting, was the multiple exchange rate system we're operating. And that again is a problem with debt payment or debt repayment. The incoming administration will need to bite these bullets and really unify our exchange rates. And let's really know what it is that we are dealing with in terms of debt servicing. But you have parallel market, or you say black market rates, and you have CBN rates. And these multiple exchange rate system would, of course, it has saved the central bank and the federal government some trouble, but all that the government has saved in terms of trouble, the government has transferred to businesses, corporations, industries, and to the ordinary Nigerian. So we need to really look at unifying that exchange rates, our exchange rate system. And of course, the biggest move will be to sit down with these our debtors and really restructure our debt.
All right. So with most of the country's money going towards debt servicing, how is this going to affect the next administration's ability to properly, you know, run the government?
I think, of course, it's going to affect the incoming administration's plans, economic plans, and programs. But the biggest problem with Nigeria has not been with revenue. We have a spending problem. You know, where we put...
Nigeria is basically spending more than it's making.
And of course, the areas where we put a lot of money, we don't get as much results as we would have if we put these monies in the right places. So we need to really look at the cost of governance. We need to really look at prioritizing budgetary expenditure and looking at critical drivers of development and not just spending on social investments.
All right, so let's quickly take a look at the issue of expanding Nigeria's tax bracket. As I said earlier on, how does this really affect the cost of living? You know, we have the average Nigerians, 133 million people, multidimensionally poor, and you're talking about expanding that tax bracket. How is this really going to end up for the average Nigerian out there? And also businesses, that's important to point out.
Of course, it's going to weigh heavily on businesses and the ordinary Nigerian. Yeah, I've argued in the past that rather than look at increasing tax rates. The government should look at how it can vitalize the economy. I mean, there are numbers out there. I'll just give a very simple example. I remember under COVID, one of the sectors that began to experience a boom was the logistics sector. That's people in Korea and the likes. And when the government saw that there was beginning to be some activity around the logistics sector, we began to hear the next minutes about fees, licenses, and all that stuff. You know, and it's very funny. What the government should have done, and of course this is lesson for other sectors, see how much you can drive, how much you can incentivize growth in these sectors or critical sectors in Nigerian economy. Then you can now focus on trimming and pruning these sectors for greater productivity.
All right, that being said, we have come to the end of our show for today. I'd like to thank my guests in the studio. Thank you so much, Joseph, for being a part of the show. And to our viewers out there, thank you so much for joining us. Please do follow us on our social media platforms. You can find us on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. Just look up Trust TV News and you definitely find us there. My name is Chamun Dabeng. Come back again. Let's talk numbers.